Simulan mong abutin ang iyong pangarap na magbibigay dangal sa iyong bukas. Ang suliranin, hindi laging nandyan, dapat mong harapin. Kami iyong kasama sa bawat takin, magkaakbay nating lulutasin. Dito sa Fernandino Teens TV, ang boses mo ay mahalaga. Dito sa Fernandino Teens TV, ikaw lagi ang bida. Ang mga aral ay ginintuang atin ng bawat guro na siyang gagabay sa iyong pagkamulat. Naway umukit ito sa iyong isipan, maging mapanuri, sundin ng wasto at nararapat. Kagandahang asal ang ipakita, ipadama ang pusong may malasakit. Dito sa Fernandino Teens TV, ang boses mo ay mahalaga. Dito sa Fernandino Teens TV, ikaw lagi ang bida. Sakali mang tayo'y subukin ng unos, ating haharapin ng walang takot. Sasamahan ka ni Fernan at Dino, ang bagong barkada mo. Dito sa Fernandino Teens TV, boses mo ay mahalaga. Dito sa Fernandino Teens TV, edukasyon mo'y sigurado na. Dito sa Fernandino Teens TV, boses mo ay mahalaga. Dito sa Fernandino Teens TV, edukasyon mo'y sigurado na.
Fernandino Teens TV.
Hi guys! Naisagawa
Hi!
niyo na ba ang assignment ninyo sa science? Deadline na bukas.
Ay, oo nga pala. Ano na nga kasi ulit ang gagawin?
Magpa-practice tayo ng earthquake drill at kukunan ng picture ng pagsasagawa ng duct cover at hold. At isisend natin yung output sa teacher natin.
Earthquake drill? Duct cover and hold? Importante ba yun? Virtual classes lang naman tayo. So, bakit pa natin kailangan mag-earthquake drill? Nasa bahay lang naman tayo.
Oo, importante yun. Ang earthquake drill awareness ay isinasagawa tuwing buwan ng Agosto. Ito ay isang pagsasanay sa pagiging handa sa anumang kalamidad na pwedeng idulot ng hindi inaasahang earthquake.
Hindi inaasahan. So, hindi natin alam kung kailan magkakaroon ito. Paano ba nagkaka-earthquake?
Para malaman natin ang mga kasagutan sa ating mga tanong, tayo na't makinig sa ating teacher lecturer ngayong araw. Tara!
Let's watch and learn!
Hi there, Fernandina teens. I am Ma'am Jaira Amalthia Y. Santos, and I will be your teacher lecturer for this episode. Before we begin, let me ask you a few questions first. You may either type your answers in the comment section or write them down in a piece of paper. Later, you may also share and discuss these answers to your family members to initiate a meaningful and relevant discussion. Are you ready, Fernandina teens? Let's start! Do you know what is an earthquake? Correct! Earthquake can easily be described as shaking or trembling by the ground. Have you experienced earthquakes in the past? Indeed, it's quite frightening, right? Earthquakes are one of the most powerful and destructive forces of nature. It can decimate properties, structures, and much worse, the lives of many people. What suggestions can you give in order to prepare for the eventual occurrence of an earthquake? Exactly! Storing canned goods and bottled water are great suggestions. However, performing an earthquake drill can definitely save the many lives of the people as well. Lastly, what do you think is the reason why our country has numerous volcanoes, mountains, mountain ranges, and experiences frequent earthquakes as compared to others? To answer this question, we will go through a journey of learning as we uncover the concepts, processes, and phenomena behind the Earth's crust in this FTTV episode. To start, here are the objectives of today's lesson. At the end of the lesson, you would be able to, first, enumerate the 3 types of plate boundaries. Second, demonstrate the movement caused by these types of plate boundaries. And third, identify the events or consequences created or brought about by the movements of these boundaries. Our country has been endowed with numerous unique and majestic landscapes like volcanoes, mountain ranges, deep ravines, and trenches. These features can be sources of different minerals or resources that help Filipinos in countless ways. Let us take, for example, Mount Pinatubo. Because of its activities in the past, it had created the central plains of Luzon Island as a perfect and fertile land suited for growing crops. Another example is the Cordillera mountain range in the north, which is famous for its mild temperature, tourist spots, and diverse plant and animal species. Knowing all of this, don't you wonder why the Philippines is blessed with so much magnificent geologic topographies? This learning episode will explain the reasons for the creation and development of such features and will give us information on the processes that lead to the formation of the Philippine Islands. As mentioned earlier, our country has been a product of various geologic events. Earth's lithosphere, which includes the crust and the upper part of the mantle, will be the focus of our discussion since most of our activities that influence the Earth's surface occur on these areas. Solid rocks like sedimentary, metamorphic, and igneous are the primary components of the Earth's crust, and its average density is 2.8 grams per cubic centimeters. Its thickness ranges from 5 kilometers to 50 kilometers, where the thickest part is found where a relatively young mountain is present, and the thinnest is found along the ocean floor. Knowing the uneven geomorphology of the Earth's surface will give us an idea on the relative density of the crust, especially when it comes to the parts covered by the seas and the oceans. This is because the downward force exerted by the water plays a vital role in determining the compactness of the sediments that comprise the crust. These types of crust, based on its density or thickness, are referred to as continental crust, or also known as continental plate, and oceanic crust or oceanic plate. Oceanic crust is the type of crust that is relatively thinner but denser compared to the continental crust. As its name implies, oceanic crust is usually submerged underwater, making it more solid and compact. On the other hand, continental crust is thicker and less dense compared to the oceanic crust. As its name suggests, it is usually represented by mountains and lands above sea level. The relationship that happens between these two types of crust is known as plate tectonics. This theory suggests that rigid sections of Earth's lithosphere, known as plates, move as a unit and interact in various ways. The type of crust, level of geologic or seismic activity, and kinds of plate movements are only few of the factors to consider in the grand scheme of Earth's geology. However, as we go further into our lesson, we will pay more attention on the types of plate movements since various landscapes, events, and consequences occur because of this. I will show you some demonstrations that explain what really happens when plates interact with one another. All of this and more when Fernandina Teens TV Season 2 returns.
Ang Schools Division Office City of San Fernando, Pampanga ay kaisa ng Department of Education sa pagsasagawa ng mga proyekto at programa na tumutugon sa mga pangangailangan ng mga mag-aaral. Inilunsad ang Division Call Center for Tutors and Guidance Counselors upang magbigay ng educational at psychological assistance sa mga mag-aaral, magulang at stakeholders ng Division. Kaya, kung may nais kayong itanong tungkol sa pag-aaral, maaaring magpadala ng mensahe sa Division Call Center for Tutors and Guidance Counselors Facebook page o tumawag sa mga numero na makikita sa ibaba ng inyong screen tuwing Lunes hanggang Biyernes sa ganap na alas 8 ng umaga hanggang alas 6 ng gabi. Maaari rin kayong sumangguni sa ating guidance counselors na nagbibigay ng guidance and counseling services. Lahat ng inyong ibabahagi ay mananatiling confidential. Ang nasabing programa ay nagsisilbing daan upang malaman ang feedbacks ng stakeholders para matulungan ang ating divisyon na mapagbuti pa ang mga sumusunod na programa. Ano pang hinihintay ninyo? Tumawag na sa aming mga numero o bumisita na sa aming Facebook page at magpadala ng inyong mga katanungan.
Fernandina Teens TV.
Welcome to Fernandina Teens TV Season 2. Fernandina Teens, have you eaten your breakfast already? A Filipino morning meal won't be completed without our well-loved hard-boiled egg. Relating it in our lesson, the shell of the egg can be likened to the Earth's crust. Once we start cracking the egg, each piece of the broken shell can be compared to the tectonic plates. So next time you eat an hard-boiled egg, remember how is this related to plate tectonics. As discussed earlier, plate tectonics is a scientific theory that explains how major landforms are created as a result of the Earth's subterranean movements. In plate tectonics, Earth's outermost layer, or lithosphere, is made up of the crust and upper mantle, which is further broken into large slabs of land known as plates. These tectonic plates are capable of movements ranging within 3 to 5 centimeters annually. Most of the effects or outcomes of these movements are observed along the edges of these plates. Evidently, the edges of the plates create a plate boundary with respect to nearby plates. That is the reason why places or countries located along these plate boundaries experience most of the seismic and volcanic activities around the world. Studying plate boundaries is important because along these boundaries deformation of the lithosphere is happening. These geologic events have a great impact not only on the environment but also on us. There are three distinct types of plate boundaries, which are differentiated by type of movement they exhibit. These are convergent plate boundary, divergent plate boundary, and transform fault boundary. The first one is termed as convergent plate boundary. Let us take, for example, the Philippine plate and the Eurasian plate. You will notice that these two plates are moving towards each other. This plate boundary is an instance of a zone where two plates collide. Remember, convergence is the word used to describe the process of collision between two plates, while the term convergent plate boundary is referring to the edges of two neighboring plates or the area where the collision happens. Convergence between two plates happen in three different ways depending on the type of crusts or plates that are colliding. These are convergence between continental plate and oceanic plate, convergence between two continental plates, and convergence between two oceanic plates. To make our discussion even easier and simpler, let us watch these animations showing the convergence between two plates.
Let us discuss the convergence between a thicker and less dense continental plate and a thinner but denser oceanic plate. As you can see, the oceanic crust and continental crust move towards one another as signified by the two arrows. However, upon colliding, the leading edge of the oceanic plate plunges towards the asthenosphere. The asthenosphere is the upper layer of the Earth's mantle, below the lithosphere. During this process, earthquakes, release of volatile fluids, and the melting of rocks occur. As a result, volcanic arc or a series of active volcanoes is also formed along the surface. Explaining this further, the reason for this volcanism is because the denser oceanic crust undergoes what we call subduction process, or the bending of the crust towards the mantle. Since the mantle is hotter than the crust, the tendency is the subducted crust melts, forming magma or the molten rock fragments found beneath the surface of the Earth. Addition of volatile materials such as water will cause the magma to become less dense, hence allowing it to rise and reach the crust once again and causing volcanic activities on the continental leading plate. For the oceanic crust, one important geologic feature is formed, and that is the trench. Also called submarine valleys, ocean trenches are the deepest part of the ocean. A number of trenches is found along our country, which includes Manila Trench, East Luzon Trench, and the Philippine Trench, which is considered as one of the world's deepest with a depth of 10,540 meters. Examples of ocean-continent convergent plate boundaries are subduction of the Nazca Plate under South America, which has created the Andes Mountains and the Peru Trench, and subduction of the Juan de Fuca Plate under North America, creating the Cascade Range. The second type of convergence along plate boundaries happen between two continental plates. As you can see in the animation, the continental crusts are moving toward each other. However, an oceanic crust is also found between the two. In this case, what happens is that as one continental crust approaches the other continental crust, it pushes the oceanic crust between them and forces it to move towards the asthenosphere. This activity causes the formation of volcanic arc along the surface due to the release of the molten materials or magma. This process also produces earthquakes. Finally, upon the collision of the two continental plates, when the oceanic crust between the two is fully consumed by the process of subduction, the two continental plates will start pushing each other upward, forming mountain range and ceasing the volcanism underneath. This is because the part of the crust or plate is no longer being subducted in the Earth's mantle or its asthenosphere. In short, no subduction will occur in the collision between a continental crust and another continental crust. Unlike the other two types of convergent boundaries, subduction stops for this particular type of convergence. No trench, no volcano, and definitely no island arcs are created during this process. Instead, what is created is a large group of tall mountains called mountain range. About 40 to 50 million years ago, two large land masses, India and Eurasia, collided to begin the formation of the most visible product of plate tectonics, the Himalayas. Since subduction is impossible between two colliding continental plates, pressure is released by pushing the crust upward and forming the Himalayan peaks. Also, a collision of continental plates is associated with shallow earthquake activity. The third type of convergent plate boundary happens when two oceanic plates converge or collide. As you can see in your screen, two oceanic crusts move towards each other. The first one is being described as an older oceanic crust, and to your right is the relatively younger oceanic crust. Upon colliding, the leading edge of the older oceanic crust subducts or plunges towards the asthenosphere, creating earthquakes and magma along the process. Destruction or melting of the subducted older oceanic crust and release of volatile materials give rise to the formation of volcanic island arc or a series of active volcanoes along the surface of the ocean. Before we continue, what do you think is the reason why the older oceanic crust is the one that has been subducted towards the asthenosphere and not the younger oceanic crust? Correct! It is because the older oceanic crust is denser than the younger oceanic crust. Like the first type of convergent boundaries discussed earlier, converging oceanic plates will cause formation of trenches, and these trenches will become sources of earthquakes. Underwater earthquakes, especially the stronger ones, can generate tsunamis. The Japanese term for harbor wave tsunami is a series of ocean waves with very long wavelengths, typically hundreds of kilometers, caused by the large-scale disturbance of the ocean.
Did you find the discussion interesting, Fernandina teens? Great! When we return, we will explore further on how our very own country, the islands of the Philippines, have been formed. Also, we will continue discussing on the other types of plate movements apart from convergence. So don't change the channel and we will be right back.
Maya po oras kaya kayo, Fernandinos. Ako pala ay Elwin Arl Serrano ng City Tourism Office ng Siyudad San Fernando. Ngayong bulan na ini, pagmasusyan tayo ang National Heritage Month na ating temang Victory and Humanity, Upholding Filipino Heritage and Identity. Kambena nini, metong karang aktibidades na ng siyudad, apin ng launching ng bayong Heritage Passport. Yung Heritage Passport, apin ng metong karing proyekto ng kaya katamong siyudad, yung pamanamuna ng Mayor Edwin D. Santiago. Anong nuka rin makalagelangan ding eganagan ng heritage sites, heritage structures, na akit tamo kin kay katamong heritage district. Makakayado din kini, ding importansya da ding mapel na tradisyon kay ni syudad, kalupa ng pamangawang parol, ang poing pamangalesa. May awo siyang heritage passport, uling atin kang dapat gawan, anong nukaran puntalan mo lading at tsuking passport, at saka ka mag-selfie. Kay ba't kanta, palto making tourism office, at mamielang sticker ka rin eganagan ang apuntulan mong lugar. At timong may ngari ang tutong passport. Balo mingeni, panahon na ini, etamo makain bisa lumal, uli na ng COVID-19 pandemic. Kaya naman kimbanwa nga ini, agkatan ko lading bikers tamo, edad 18 hanggang 50, imbis na lumaot kayo po, di na nyo lang dita ka oras di kaya katamong heritage structures kaya ni syudad. Anya naman karing mumunang 50 bikers ang makayari kaya katamong heritage passport, midinan lang premyong Only San Fernando loot bag. Inggawan nyo mo bakan ta makapag-register, punta kayo mismo opisina na ng City Tourism, yung munisipyo, at saka kayo magdalang metong valid ID. Kabinan ng kaya kayong heritage passport, ating makasipit ang instruction nung nano pa ing dapat gawan. Anya naman ka rin hanggang kapadyakin, nanano ko pa, tara na!
Fernandino Teens TV.
You are still watching Fernandina Teens TV Season 2. A while ago, we have learned that convergence is the process when plates move towards each other and taking place along a convergent plate boundary. We also have learned that convergence may occur in 3 different ways, depending on the types of crust or plate involved in the collision. Can you enumerate these 3 types of convergence, Fernandina teens? Amazing! These 3 types of convergence are the following: continental to oceanic, continental to continental, and oceanic to oceanic. Before we proceed with our discussion, let me ask you these very interesting questions. What do you think the Philippines looked like millions of years ago? What kind of dinosaurs might have inhabited the Philippine Islands during the prehistoric era? How did our country form in the first place? All these questions will be answered in connection to our previous discussion because many parts of the Philippines originated from oceanic to oceanic convergence. As discussed earlier, this resulted from the collision of 2 oceanic plates, with one of the plates diving under the other. Majority of the islands in the Philippine archipelago are considered as a part of the Philippine Mobile Belt. These islands were formed 65 million years ago at the southern edge of the Philippine Sea Plate and are considered as part of the island arcs. Other parts of the Philippines, such as Palawan, Mindoro, and the Zamboanga Peninsula, are all highland sections of the Sundaland Block of the Eurasian Plate. The Philippine Mobile Belt eventually collided with the Sundaland Block, which explains the presence of trenches, such as the Manila Negros Cotabato Trench System and the Sulu Trench. On the eastern side of the Philippines, trenches like the Philippine Trench and the East Luzon Trough are both products of subducting Philippine Sea Plate beneath the archipelago. Aside from the formation of the trenches and troughs, the downward movement of oceanic lithosphere underneath the Philippine archipelago creates active volcanic chains. For example, the descent of the West Philippine Sea oceanic lithosphere along the Manila Trench created the volcanic chain from Taiwan to Mindoro. Some of the known active volcanoes in this chain are Pinatubo in central Luzon and Taal in Batangas. Also, the constant dipping movement of slabs induces frequent moderate to strong earthquakes. At various depths, gives rises to the mountain ranges and develops the geologic character of the Philippine archipelago. Now, the question: what kinds of dinosaurs lived in our country during the prehistoric era is actually invalid because there was no Philippines yet to begin with when the dinosaurs were still the dominant species on Earth. The Philippines during that time was underwater. Its mass was formed only about 65 million years ago, a few millions of years after the last dinosaurs have lived. At this time, let us proceed with the next 2 types of plate boundaries, which are the divergent plate boundary and transform fault boundary. Divergent plate boundary exists as 2 plates start to move away from each other, creating a depression at the center of the edge of the 2 plates. This process is also known as divergence. On the other hand, transform fault boundary is created when two nearby plates are moving and grinding past each other. To better understand these two plate boundaries, let us watch these video clips once more.
As you can see, divergent plate boundaries form when two continental plates or crusts start to move apart. This causes the ground to split few centimeters per year, creating an oceanic crust between the two. This movement of the plates is caused by the geological process underneath the Earth, which also serves as the mechanism for plate tectonics. During the process of divergence, the splitting of the ground forms a rift valley. A rift valley is characterized by a linear-shaped lowland region found between the several highlands or mountain ranges created by the action of a seafloor spreading. Formation of rift valleys and oceanic ridges are indications that the crust is spreading or splitting apart. In this case, the plates are forming divergent plate boundaries, wherein they tend to move apart. Most divergent boundaries are situated along underwater mountain ranges called oceanic ridges. As the plates separate, new materials from the mantle ooze up to fill the gap. These materials will slowly cool down to produce new ocean floor. The spreading rate at these ridges may vary from 2 to 20 cm per year. Although a very slow process, divergence of plates ensure a continuous supply of new materials from the mantle. The Mid-Atlantic Ocean Ridge is an example of the spreading center, which causes the divergence of South American plate and the African plate. When a spreading center develops within a continent, the crust may break into several segments. The breaking leads to the formation of down-faulted valleys called rift valleys. It is also associated with the rising of hot materials from the mantle. The rift valley increases its length and depth as the spreading continues. At this point, the valley develops into a linear sea similar to the Red Sea today. Lastly, let us have the transform fault boundary. This type of plate boundary is characterized by its peculiar movement. As you can see in the video clip, the two plates are moving in such a way that they grind past each other. Along this movement, earthquake also develops. However, it is important to take note that there is no other landforms, events, or consequences created during this process. Most transform faults join two segments of a mid-ocean ridge. Remember that the presence of a ridge is an indication of diverging plates, and as the plates diverge between the two segments of the mid-ocean ridge, the adjacent slabs of crust are grinding past each other. The immediate concerns about transform fault boundaries are earthquake activities triggered by movements along the fault system. Although most transform faults are located within the ocean basins, there are a few that cut through the continental crust. An example of this is the San Andreas Fault. San Andreas Fault is one of the most famous examples of transform fault boundary and is located in the west coast of United States. It became well known globally because it has been featured in a disaster-themed movie in 2015.
Were you able to understand the concepts and topics presented for Nadina teens? Awesome! This lesson is very important since it relates to various calamity experienced in our country. Thus, it also makes us aware regarding ways to mitigate the effects of such natural disasters. At the same time, it gives us an idea on the origin of our country and develops our feeling of pride and identity. When we return, we will have the most exciting part of our lesson. We will play a game that features or involves the concepts that we have taken up just recently. So, don't go away and we'll be right back.
Hindi lamang sa larangan ng pangkabuhayan apektado ang maraming pamilyang Pilipino, kundi maging sa larangan ng pagkatuto ng bawat batang Pilipino. Inilunsad ng siyudad ng San Fernando ang programang Nurturing Environment and System for Thriving or NEST, isang education community pantry na naglalayon para sa isang malawakang pagtulong, pagtantabay at paggabay na ang focus ay ang makapagbigay ng tulong at suporta sa ating mga mag-aaral sa pamamagitan ng pagbibigay ng educational needs gaya na lamang ng school supplies, tutorial sessions, study tips, at iba pang mga pamamaraan na mas lalong makatutulong sa pag-angat ng ating edukasyon. Dahil hindi hadlang ang pandemya sa magandang kinabukasang naghihintay sa ating mga mag-aaral. Sino-sino nga ba ang mga kalahok sa programang ito? Sa pagtutulungan ng ating school administrators, guro, magulang, at iba pang mga miyembro ng ating komunidad gaya ng barangay officials at sangguniang kabataan ay siguradong magiging mas matagumpay ang programang ito. Paano nga ba ang magiging proseso ng naturang programa? Una, magkakaroon tayo ng isang Facebook group, ang Pampanga High School Nest Education Community Pantry na pangungunahan ng Educational Pantry Coordinator. Ang mga magulang, tagapangalaga at mga guro ay ia-add ng ating Educational Pantry members sa Facebook group na ito. Sa page na ito maaaring i-post ng mga magulang at tagapangalaga o sino mang miyembro ng Educational Pantry ang kanilang mga kahilingan o requests. Kailangan ding ilagay ang pangalan ng mag-aaral, grade at section para sa mas agarang aksyon. Oo nga pala, hindi lang requests ang pwedeng i-post. Pwede ring mag-post ang mga nais magbigay ng tulong o mga gustong mag-donate. Sabi nga nila, sharing is caring. Tandaan na ang Facebook group na ito ay pribado at posts na may kaugnayan lamang sa page na ito ang maaaprobahan. Mayroon din palang Google Form na ipamamahagi kung saan maaari nating isumite ang ating requests o kahilingan. Paano naman ang mga walang internet access sa bahay? Huwag mangamba dahil merong mga nakalaang drop boxes ang ating paaralan na kung saan maaaring ihulog ng mga magulang at tagapangalaga ang kanilang requests. Sa mga nais namang mag-donate ng school supplies, maaaring ilagay ang mga ito sa tabi ng drop boxes. Maaari ring mag-donate ng mga kagamitan o cash donation kaakibat ang pagsusumite ng deed of donation form. Pangalawa, mahalaga ang ugnayan ng mga guro at ng mga magulang o tagapangalaga sa programang ito. Gamit ang video calls o chats ay ipahahayag ng mga guro ang adhikain ng programang ito sa mga magulang o tagapangalaga. Maaari ring gawin ang orientation na ito ng face-to-face kasabay ng schedule ng kuhanan ng mga module. Gaya ng nabanggit, hindi lamang mga bagay ang maaaring i-donate. Pwede ring mag-conduct ng tutorial session, study tips, at iba pang mga kagamitan sa pagkatuto gaya ng mga aklat o kaya ay gadgets. Ikatlo, ang requested needs ng ating mga magulang o tagapangalaga ay ililista ng ating Nest focal person. Ang mga coordinator naman ang mag-aayos ng mga ito. Ang advisors ng ating mga mag-aaral, guidance counselor, at iba pang mga guro ay ipaaalam sa ating mga magulang at tagapangalaga ang petsa at oras ng pamimigay ng requested needs na gaganapin sa paaralan. Sabi nga nila, it takes a village to raise a child. Kaya naman aktibo at iba yung pakikilahok ang inaasahan sa pagsasanib puwersa ng paaralan at barangay na siyang tutukoy sa pangangailangan ng bawat Fernandinong mag-aaral at kikilos upang matugunan ito sa tulong at suporta rin ng mga miyembro ng komunidad. Isang malawakang komunidad para sa isang produktibong educational community pantry ay tiyak na lilikha ng iba yung pagkilos upang maging mas magaan at madali ang pagkatuto ng bawat kabataang Fernandino. Kaya naman tandaan, magbigay ayon sa kakayahan, kumuha ayon sa pangangailangan.
Fernandino Teens TV.
We are back at Fernandina Teens TV Season 2. Truly, nature is the gift of God to humankind. Most of the time, we enjoy its breathtaking beauty, serenity, and bountiful harvest. However, there are times when it shows its power and makes us feel small and insignificant. These are the times when we experience the force of nature's firsthand. This is especially true when it comes to our country. Every island, rugged mountains, and distinctive terrain has been shaped and influenced by its element. As beautiful as it may seem, the Philippines has been a manifestation of its power and will continue to be so into the future. Previously, you have watched the video clips that entail the movements created by the different forms of plate boundaries. You also learned about the remarkable results created by these movements. Before we continue, let us make a summary of what we have discussed. There are two types of plates or crusts: continental plate and oceanic plate. Continental plate is thicker and less dense, and oceanic plate is thinner but denser. These two types of plate thickness and density contribute to the outcomes or results in the topography of the Earth's surface. Tectonic plates or crusts are directly influenced by physical processes that take place within the interior of the Earth. These processes, as mentioned in plate tectonics theory, serve as the driving mechanism that makes the plate move few centimeters per year. Although seemingly irrelevant number compared to the grand magnitude of Earth's geology, this would become a major factor in the dynamism of our living planet. As modern technology and history dictates, these very small steps, when taken through millennia, have actually changed the face of our planet many times over. Moving forward, tectonic plates also display different movements depending on the plate boundary. The first one is convergence. Convergence happens along a convergent plate boundary where the plates are moving towards one another. Moreover, there are three types of convergence depending on the types of plates that converge. First is continental to oceanic. This happens when the denser oceanic plates collide with a less dense continental plate. This interaction results to earthquakes, trench, as well as the birth of volcanic arcs along the continental plate due to the process of subduction. Second is continental to continental. This happens when a continental plate collides with another continental plate, resulting to earthquakes and mountain ranges. Last is oceanic to oceanic convergence. As the name implies, an oceanic plate moves toward another oceanic plate, resulting to earthquakes, volcanic islands, and trenches due to subduction. Convergent plate boundary is also often referred to as destructive boundary because of the subduction process. This happens when one plate slides under another plate going towards the asthenosphere. The heat in the upper mantle and frictional force is so great that it causes the leading edge of the sinking plate to melt, creating magma. The second type of plate movement is divergence. Divergence is the exact opposite of convergence. Instead of making a collision, the plates start to move away from each other. Diverging plates result to rift valley, which eventually turns into an ocean ridge. Ocean ridges, particularly the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, has been considered as the birthplace of the Earth's crust since it is where the molten materials from the inner parts of the planet is being released and become new land. It is proven by tests conducted among the rocks and sediments found along the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. It was found out that the rocks closer to the divergent boundary are relatively young, and as the observation moves toward the continents, the rocks become older. This only proves the release of new materials from the divergent boundary and carried by this movement in a manner that this spreading originating from the center. Because of this reason, the divergent plate boundaries were considered to be as constructive plate boundaries and the site for seafloor spreading. The last among the three types of plate boundaries is the transform fault boundary. In this type of plate boundary, the two crusts are grinding past each other, resulting to earthquakes. San Andreas Fault in California, USA is a famous example for this type of plate boundary. Transform fault boundary is considered as conservative because it does not create nor destroy the Earth's crust. After making a summary of the entire lesson, I assume that you are now ready for our game. The mechanics of the game is fairly easy to understand. I will just mention a question and you will choose an answer based from the choices that will flash into your screen. So, are you ready for Nandina teens? Let's start! Number 1. What do you call the scientific theory that explains how major landforms are created due to Earth's subterranean movements? A. Seafloor spreading. B. Tectonic plates. C. Plate tectonics. And D. Continental drift. Correct, Fernandina teens. The answer is letter C, plate tectonics. Plate tectonics also explains on how the crust is divided into large pieces of lands. Number 2. Which of the following is being referred to as large slabs of Earth's crust that are capable of moving? A. Seafloor. B. Plates. C. Islands. And D. Continents. Precisely. The answer is letter B. Plates. Tectonic plates, or simply plates, are the large pieces of land that makes up the Earth's crust. Number 3. Which of the following statements is true? A. Oceanic crust is thicker and denser than the continental crust. B. Oceanic crust is thinner and less dense than the continental crust. C. Continental crust is thicker and less dense than the oceanic crust. And D. Continental crust is thinner and denser than the oceanic crust. You are doing good, Fernandina teens. The answer is letter C. The continental crust is thicker and less dense than the oceanic crust. Number 4. What do you call the process when the leading edge of the plate plunges towards the upper part of the mantle? A. Sinking. B. Seismicity. C. Subduction. And D. Volcanism. That's great! The answer is letter C. Subduction. Subduction is the process when a denser plate is destroyed upon reaching the asthenosphere. Number 5. What geologic event is most likely to happen in a divergent plate boundary? A. Mountain formation. B. Rift valley. C. Volcanic eruption. And D. All of this. Nicely done! The answer is letter B, Rift Valley. Continuing the process of divergence, the Rift Valley may eventually turn into Ocean Ridge. Number 6. What do you expect to find parallel to a trench? A. Hotspot. B. Ocean Ridge. C. Rift Valley. And D. Volcanic arc. Keep the momentum for Nandina teens. The answer is letter D, volcanic arc. Trench and volcanic arc are the consequences brought about by the convergence between the continental and oceanic plates. Number 7. If you visit a place in the Pacific known to be along convergent plates, which of this should you not to expect to see? A. Active volcanoes. B. Mountain ranges. C. Rift valleys. And D. Volcanic islands. Commendable! The answer is rift valleys. This is because the rift valleys are formed due to the process of divergence and not convergence. Number 8. You are an oceanographer and want to map the ocean floor on the east coast of the Philippines. As you do your study, you notice that there is a portion in the ocean floor which is relatively much deeper than the rest. What most likely is that deeper part? A. Linear sea. B. Oceanic ridge. C. Rift valley. And D. Trench. Very good! The answer is letter D, trench. Trenches are considered to be the deepest parts of the ocean floor. Number 9. What do you expect to find at the mid-ocean ridge? A. Relatively young rocks. B. Reverse fault. C. Think accumulation of sediments. And D. Very ancient rocks. Terrific, Fernandina teens! The answer is letter A. The mid-ocean ridge is the site where the new ocean floor is being created. Therefore, it's safe to say that the rocks found in this area are relatively young. Number 10. Which plate boundary is formed between the Philippine plate and the Eurasian plate? A. Convergent. B. Divergent. C. Reverse fault. And D. Transform fault. Amazing! The answer is letter A. Convergent plate boundary. The Eurasian plate and Philippine plate are colliding with each other. Were you able to get all the correct answers, Fernandina teens? Great! And that concludes our meaningful discussion. Here are the references used in this learning episode. I hope that you learned something new in your lesson today. Again, I am Ma'am Jaira Amalthia Y. Santos, hoping for your safety and wellness. See you around!
Ngayon, alam ko na kung bakit nagkaka-earthquake. Dahil pala ito sa movement ng mga plates, kaya pala hindi natin malalaman kung kailan ito mangyayari.
Tama! Kaya mas maiging may alam tayo at maging handa sakaling magkaroon ng hindi inaasahang earthquake.
Hindi lang sa earthquake, natutunan ko din na nagkakaroon ng pagguho ng lupa sa kadahilanan ng pagsabog ng bulkan o pagbuo ng mga bundok dahil sa iba't ibang galaw ng mga plate boundaries.
Dino, wala ka bang naaalala sa hawak mong nilagang itlog na yan?
Siyempre meron. Nakinig ata ako kay Ma'am Jai. Ang itlog na ito ay parang plate tectonics theory na napapatungkol sa pagkahiwa-hiwalay ng mga plate sa ating mundo.
Ang galing! Ang dami nating natutuhan ngayong araw. O sige, mukhang nagugutom ako at gusto ko na ding magpaluto at kumain ng nilagang itlog para maumpisahan ko ng maisagawa ang aking earthquake drill assignment. Kaya naman,
Maraming salamat, Ma'am.
Isa na namang makabuluhang talakayan ang ating natunghayan, Fernandino Teens.
Magkita-kita tayong muli sa susunod na episode ng
Fernandino
Teens
TV.
Season 2.
na kung saan ang kabataang Fernandino ay angat sa aking talino.
Bagong umaga, yakapin mo ang bagong pag-asa. Simulan mong abutin ang iyong pangarap na magbibigay dangal sa iyong bukas. Ang suliranin, hindi laging nandyan, dapat mong harapin. Kami iyong kasama sa bawat takin, magkaakbay nating lulutasin. Dito sa Fernandino Teens TV, ang boses mo ay mahalaga. Dito sa Fernandino Teens TV, ikaw lagi ang bida. Ang mga aral ay ginintuang atin ng bawat guro na siyang gagabay sa iyong pagkamulat. Naway umukit ito sa iyong isipan, maging mapanuri, sundin ng wasto at nararapat, kagandahang nasa